Andrew, you just went up in my books. I wanted to acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples, firstly, on whose ancestral lands we are. I'd like to thank the Public Policy Forum for the continued work that the Policy Forum does in its work. Tremendous opportunities right across this country. I want to congratulate Carol, David, and Mike for today's recognition of their respective tremendous contributions to the well-being of the peoples of this province. And I kind of feel like I shouldn't be a part of this great company here. And that's how I hold you up high in my world for the tremendous contributions you've made to this province and certainly to this country. I want to also acknowledge my chiefs, some of whom are here tonight. I wanted to say that I am deeply honored to be the beneficiary of this generous recognition, but I have to say that the full credit for the tremendous advancements in Aboriginal public policy goes to our chiefs, our leaders, and bad advocates in our community. In all of our communities, I have been blessed to speak and act publicly on their behalf to carry their messages of concern and hope. Tonight, I saw the video, and I didn't know that my wife had another name, but she was called Wendy George. The tremendous video on the work of our dear friend Milton Wong. He is a bright light shining in all of our lives, and certainly in the work of this province, and we owe him and his family tremendous gratitude. I wanted to also say, in respect of public service, we worked with the province and the federal government to establish internship programs for young Aboriginal youth, I should say. They're young and they're also youthful, but they're not children. Some of them are probably all of them are students in universities or colleges in this province, and probably now it's a small beginning, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 130, 140 young people who've had an opportunity to work within provincial or federal governments within the various ministries for a period of a year interning. And I was really happy to see tonight one of those young people who went through that. It's a student at UBC now, Sasha. I'm not sure where you are, Sasha Young. A young lady from the Tl'azt'en First Nations communities. In those opportunities, and education as that tool, that tremendous tool that opens doors for all of us. And the opportunity for these young people to take advantage of that, and that's really been probably the largest passion that I've had, is creating that opportunity for young people to take advantage or to be educated. When I was just out of high school, probably maybe even the first year of university, I went home one summer, and my chief said to me, Ed, we're going to be taking over the welfare program from Indian Affairs. And I said, why me? I'm just out of high school. He said, well, you're the one with the most education in our community. And so I said, what am I going to do? How am I supposed to do it? I don't know anything about this stuff. Except I knew about it, of course, because our communities without employment, many of our families, including mine, were on welfare. And so he gave me the challenge, and our office was in the bedroom of Harry, our chief's, underneath her bed. That was where our office was. She had 3 or 4 boxes, and that's where our office was. So he said, well, you have to do something. So I looked around the community, and I lived in a house of I had 9 brothers and sisters, 10 of us, and our parents, or 12 of us in a 3-bedroom house. I knew that every other house in the community was like that. So when I looked around the community and I saw 2 buildings that were vacant. One was the church, and the other one was a priest house. I said, no, we got an office now. Took everything out of the priest house, put it in the church, and made that into an office. And the elders weren't happy, but they're really devout Catholics, so I had to talk to them. And then, of course, no desks, no pencils, no papers, nothing, absolutely nothing. And we began the journey for the development of a small public service in our community, the public servant being myself. So we worked on that basis, but we had good teachings, all of us. As a young boy growing up in my village in Tl'azt'en, we were always instructed by our elders and our parents to be mindful and respectful of all other peoples, and to ensure that the elders, the disabled, and the children in the village who needed our support, that we were there to provide that. And we provided that support without question, and we didn't have to be asked. We were told once, and we knew what we had to do. There was a blind man in the village who took care of himself very well, but it was always our job to go check on him to see if he had enough firewood and enough water. And if there wasn't firewood or if there wasn't any water in his house, we had to get the wood, and we had to get water for him from down the lake in buckets. And nobody told us that we had to do it. We just knew we had to do it, and we were told early, and we practiced that. So this was a sense of responsibility taught to us early on, and that we relied on each other. So food from the land was shared generously, whether it was a bear or deer or moose or char from the lakes or salmon, that it was shared generously with other members of the family, particularly widows with children, and we had a number, elders and those with large families. So this public service idea, from where I stand, from where I sit, is driven by our deep sense of relationships with and responsibilities for each other. In fact, in our own history, our very survival depended on it. One of the large public policy initiatives in this country's history was the 1982 patriation of the Constitution, some of which were referred to. And so we have individuals like Peter Lougheed, then the Premier of Alberta, to thank for this. The Constitution contains 17 key words concerning Aboriginal peoples, and these are the 17 words. The existing Aboriginal and treaty rights of the Aboriginal peoples of Canada are hereby recognized and affirmed. That constitutional recognition and affirmation is absolutely fundamental. But 4 First Ministers' conferences to determine what those 17 words meant failed completely. So after a number of years, this issue eventually ended up in the Supreme Court of Canada in the early 1990s, and it was a Sparrow decision from Musqueam. And of course, my wife, Wendy, is from the Sparrow family, and it had to do with the ability of the community to be able to take fish from the river to feed their families. A people having to go to the Supreme Court of Canada to feed themselves. And that was an astonishing part of this country's history, but that was the reality. That's how, and that's where we've been since the early 1990s to now. Some 40 cases to the Supreme Court of Canada, largely as a result of the political failures in this province. There's been some incremental successes, yes. The large issue of the rights, full rights, and the recognition of these rights has still eluded us despite some 20 years. Mike, 20 years since we signed that agreement, the Squamish Nation Recreation Centre, to set up a treaty negotiation process. And we're far from resolving these issues through good faith negotiations. I've been a witness pretty much to all of those cases that have been to the Supreme Court of Canada. And one of the real policy failures of this country is demanding First Nations people, Aboriginal people, the original Indigenous peoples to this land, having us to prove who we are as Indigenous peoples and having us to prove that we have rights in our territories. The ability to use timber resources or to ability to use forestry or fishery resources or other resources in our territories. The fundamental failure of that policy, the lack of recognition. Constitution talked about recognition and affirmation, and it didn't say until proven in the courts. But that's where we are now. And every set of pleadings that I've seen and every set of legal arguments I've seen in this country have been around the need for First Nations to prove their existence, very existence as peoples with rights. And I think it's a profound failure on Canada's part, having to force Indigenous peoples to that. And that's really been what has been driving myself and our leaders and our people in this province in particular, trying to find that place. We've been kind of perpetual outsiders. We've been seen as threats to the economy. We've been seen in many different ways. And yet we come forward with patience, with resolution, resolve on our part, that we will find our way through this. And it's been difficult, but we've been determined. We've been focused in our efforts, and that's where we continue to be. I know that some of these messages they're not always. It doesn't make friends. These are not messages or positions that gives a lot of friends to us. My wife, Wendy, this morning spoke to a group of 50 in-house legal counsel, senior legal counsel, about Aboriginal rights. And I was thinking as she was leaving, God help those people down there. Wendy's coming. And it's the same message that we continue to bring forward. We deeply... in these cases that I was talking about, the one thing that really troubles me is this, that concept of denial is still there. And any time we've been to the Supreme Court of Canada, and I've been involved from Sparrow all the way to pretty much all the cases, not every one of them, but it's this, is that we see when we end up in the Supreme Court of Canada building in Ottawa, all the governments and industry are on one side of the courtroom, arguing against this ragtag bunch of Indians on the other side. Every single case has been like that. And then we talk about reconciliation. I don't know how we can find reconciliation when we're that deeply divided. So we have to find ways in which to bridge that divide. And it's not an easy task. It's a very difficult task. I think that... Thank you. Sometimes I think that this practice in Canada really violates fundamental human rights, internationally recognized and supported, to force people into the courts, to force people to prove who they are. Nonetheless, we continue to push forward. Pretty much many of you know of the social and economic conditions of our peoples in our communities, and we're trying to find our way out. We're trying to find our way through this. And we've reached out to industry, we've reached out to third parties, we've reached out to the universities. Please educate our children, give them the best education you can. To the public education system, we have arrangements with municipalities, mayors, communities who are our neighbors, people who build towns and cities next to our ancient communities, and trying to be that good neighbor. And we continue to do that. We advocate for justice at the international level, as I said, as well as in the courts. And it's about our survival, our dignity, and well-being. And I think that if we can help our communities and our people, then we are helping Canada as well. And so sometimes we have to reach across and ask for that help and that support and that assistance. We are deeply engaged in efforts to reconcile interests. We're $350, $400 million in debt as First Nations, monies that we borrowed from the government to finance our negotiations, our side at the negotiation table. And our chiefs question that. But yet they're committed and continue to do that. So we are committed to be engaged in the spirit of good faith, in constructive initiatives with all interests, government interests, industry interests, other third-party interests. True and meaningful efforts to build lasting and effective reconciliation are absolutely essential. And we continue, of course, to call on Canada, the province of British Columbia, industry, municipalities, faith groups, anyone who will listen to us and talk with us and give us 2 minutes to help us on this path to reconstruct and to rebuild and to strengthen in our communities, because any improvements we can make certainly is an improvement for all of us. And, you know, that young lady that I mentioned, Sasha, and the fact that she went through this 1-year internship program and is now doing a political science degree at the University of British Columbia, and many others. Mina from my own community, who's a law student at UBC. These are the young people we need to train, and we need to train them well so that we can have a brighter future for our people, for our young people. And this is not just something that's going to happen now, it's something that we want to build from 2 or 3 or 4 generations from now. So I just want to say in closing, the other day I was, one of my grandsons is 5 years old, came to my house, and for some reason that reality show Pawn Stars was on. Not porn stars, Pawn Stars. And he looked up there and he looked at me and he looked at the TV. He says, "Papa," he says, "you look like that old man up there." The old grandpa that was up there. So these are the source of inspiration, are these children and grandchildren and the young people that really drive and light the fire of our passions as First Nations leaders in this province. And again, I do thank our chiefs and our leaders and advocates in our communities. And very lastly, I want to thank Wendy for her tremendous support in the work that I do. But, you know, we're kind of like each other. You know, she's pretty passionate about these issues, so we have very intense discussions, believe me. Thank you very much. Merci.